President Trump's most senior diplomat makes his debut on the international stage. The new US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is meeting his counterparts, including from Britain and Russia, at the G20 summit in Germany. We'll have the latest from the summit and from Washington. Also this lunchtime, Britain's most senior judge says some press coverage of the Article 50 Supreme Court case undermined the rule of law. Researchers say taking vitamin D supplements could prevent 3 million people in the UK getting colds or flu every year. A state of emergency in the New Zealand city of Christchurch as wildfires take hold over nearly 5,000 acres. More teams and more host nations. FIFA's president says 4 countries could stage the 2026 World Cup.
Here, 20 people have been left homeless following the explosion that caused a block of flats to collapse. And survival against the odds, the rare condition affecting these twins, which required surgery while still in the womb.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC News at 1. President Trump's most senior diplomat is making his debut on the international stage at the G20 summit in Germany. The new US Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, is meeting Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov this lunchtime, at a time when contacts between the Trump administration and Moscow are under the spotlight. The US State Department says Mr. Tillerson will try to provide a comforting message to countries uneasy about apparent changes in America's foreign policy positions. We'll be live in Germany in a moment. But first, this report from Wira Davis.
With so much attention on his own difficulties at home, Donald Trump might be thankful that for the next couple of days, the spotlight will fall squarely on the shoulders of his new Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, attending the G20 summit in Germany. Among his first meetings was with Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson.
The people of Gambia were delighted to be coming back into the Commonwealth. Not something the United States is going to be doing.
Not that I'm aware of.
Small talk and jokes for the cameras, but Mr. Tillerson's counterparts will want to hear reassuring words about many things, including the new administration's commitment to NATO. In a turbulent, uncertain world, much has been made of Mr. Tillerson's previous role as a senior oil executive with very close business ties to Moscow. A relationship that will come under microscopic scrutiny when he sits down with Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov. From security to global trade, the uncertainty about where the United States now stands on many big issues is almost unprecedented.
On the one hand, you have chaos and a possibly compromised administration. And by that, I do mean the President, Donald Trump, and his closest advisors, some of whom are being implicated for ties to Moscow. On the other hand, you have the pragmatist. For example, Jim Mattis, the longtime general who is defense secretary, trying to say to NATO allies, OK, let's put this back on course.
But what's also unprecedented and unacceptable, says President Trump, is what he calls a biased, discredited media, like the New York Times and CNN, which he accuses of relying too heavily on leaks and hearsay to undermine his government.
I do think that there is not the same rigor going on right now in newsrooms. The number of rubbish stories that we're seeing with reporters just rushing to publish with thinly sourced or anonymously sourced stories is not doing any favors to the impression that they're out to get Donald Trump.
The president again took to Twitter today to attack press coverage. But there's also clear, undeniable evidence that his administration is struggling. Andrew Pudzer, the president's nominee for Labour Secretary, withdrew late last night after cross-party opposition in Congress. These are testing times for Mr. Trump, less than a month after he took office. Wira Davis, BBC News.
And we'll be talking to Gary O'Donoghue in Washington in just a moment. But first, let's head to the G20 summit. Our diplomatic correspondent James Robbins is in Germany for that. And striking, James, that suggestion from the State Department that there'll be a comforting message. I mean, what do the member states where you are want to hear from him?
It's very clear that much of the outside world represented at this G20 meeting, both the leading industrialized countries and the most rapidly emerging economies, a group of more than 20 countries, are very, very anxious, alarmed, frankly, about what they regard as an unpredictable, radically changing American foreign policy they haven't even understood, let alone got to grips with. And so Rex Tillerson has got a big job to do to reassure them. He says that's what he wants to do. His first most challenging meeting this afternoon is going to be with his opposite number, his counterpart from Russia, Sergei Lavrov. And that's going to be a really critical meeting because this is a veteran foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, one of the longest serving on the bloc, who will undoubtedly be trying to size up analyse any sense of American weakness, which is the charge, of course, against the administration from its critics, who say that the administration is compromised, partly by Rex Tillerson's commercial ties, his links to Vladimir Putin before he left business to become Secretary of State, and partly by everything that's happened in the turmoil in Washington over the past few days. Rex Tillerson obviously will try to distance himself from any of that controversy, try to reassure allies and critics that the United States is going to pursue a twin-track policy towards Russia, that it's going to be highly critical over the Ukraine, for instance, in particular, and it's going to maintain sanctions, which is one of the charges that critics make, that you seem to be showing signs in Washington of weakening them. And yet it also wants to engage in the other track of the policy with Vladimir Putin and explore ways of building a better relationship. It's clear, though, that many of the people represented here, not least Chancellor Merkel of Germany, where this meeting is being held, are very alarmed. She's been talking about the danger of one country trying to manage the world's problems on its own.
James, thank you, James Robbins. Let's head to Washington as well. Gary O'Donoghue monitoring everything there for us. And meanwhile, James Mattis has been, as we know, at NATO headquarters. And again, some very, very strong comments from him, Gary.
Yes, there are. I'm picking up on what James said, that, American foreign policy, developed American foreign policy, is a work in progress at the moment. There aren't clear developed areas where the world can know exactly what the US is thinking at this stage. One of the areas perhaps where they can is on America's attitude to NATO at the moment. Now, you'll remember during the campaign, Donald Trump called it obsolete. That rhetoric has all gone away. And what we've had now is James Mattis, the Defence Secretary, saying that he stands behind NATO, but giving a very tough message about the responsibilities of other NATO countries to pay their way. Only 3 other countries, I think, maybe 4 other countries, apart from the United States, pay this 2% of their annual incomes towards defence, which is a prerequisite of NATO membership. And James Mattis has gone further and said, look, if you don't do this, guys, we're going to have to consider moderating, his word, moderating the US contribution to NATO. Now, what that might mean, who knows? But you can imagine it might mean things like reconsidering that deployment of a whole armoured brigade in Poland recently, which was seen as a way of shoring up that threat from Russia, deployments in the Baltic states as well. One other thing on the horizon to be aware of in terms of defence and policy towards the Middle East that will inflict on Russia is that this 30-day review of the Islamic State strategy comes up at the end of February, and that's when we're going to hear whether or not America is prepared to do joint actions inside Syria with the Russians.
Gary, thank you. Gary O'Donoghue in Washington and James Robbins there in Germany. Britain's most senior judge has criticised sections of the press for their coverage of the ruling which said Parliament had to be consulted before the process to leave the EU could be triggered. The President of the Supreme Court, Lord Neuberger, also accused politicians of not being quick enough to defend the judicial process. This report from our legal affairs correspondent, Clive Coleman.
If the EU referendum stirred the country's emotions, the court case about who had the right to trigger Britain leaving under Article 50, ministers alone or Parliament, raised even stronger feelings. When businesswoman Gina Miller won a ruling preventing the government from starting the process without Parliament, some in the media saw red.
The coverage by parts of the press of the judges that decided the Article 50 case here at the High Court against the government stung and hurt the judiciary. though judges didn't feel that they could respond without compromising their position. But now, the country's most senior judge, the outgoing president of the Supreme Court, clearly feels that the time's right to say something.
Some of the things that were said risked undermining the judiciary and unfairly undermining the judiciary and therefore undermining the rule of law.
This former tabloid editor disagrees.
When you get an important issue like Brexit being decided by uniquely for the first time, I think, in 43 years by a referendum, you're going to get big reactions on both sides. So I defend the right of a newspaper to give a rather large raspberry to a controversial decision.
And Lord Neuberger wasn't impressed by the response of politicians, including the Lord Chancellor Liz Truss, who has a statutory duty to defend the independence of the judiciary.
The politicians acted slower than one would have hoped and perhaps expressed themselves rather more pallidly than one would have hoped. But to be fair to politicians, like judges, they learn. And after the Supreme Court gave its decision, they did precisely what they should have done.
In response to that, Liz Truss said in a statement that it's right that everyone understands the importance of judicial independence and the rule of law in a free society.
If sections of the press can be criticised for undermining the rule of law, then the Supreme Court itself, currently made up of 10 white men and 1 white woman, has faced criticism for a marked lack of diversity.
The process of appointing a new president and 2 new justices begins today, with steps to encourage a diverse range of candidates, including the option of part-time working. That should get a favourable press. Clive Coleman, BBC News.
Researchers say taking vitamin D supplements could prevent more than 3 million people in the UK from getting colds or flu every year. Sunshine is needed to produce the vitamin naturally in the skin, and levels plummet during the winter. The team from Queen Mary, University of London, says the vitamin should be added to foods like bread. Here's our health correspondent, Dominic Hughes.
This is what vitamin D deficiency can look like. Softened bones bowing under the weight of the body. In children, it can cause rickets. But now researchers say vitamin D may have other benefits apart from strengthening bones.
Effectively, vitamin D boosts the production of natural antibiotic substances called antimicrobial peptides, which are toxic to bacteria and viruses. I think we've shown that the effects of vitamin D to prevent respiratory infections are on a par with those of flu vaccine. That's a significant effect.
They argue that if everyone got enough vitamin D, there would be a 10% reduction in the risk of respiratory illnesses such as coughs, colds and flu. Among those with the very lowest levels of vitamin D, the benefit is even greater, a 50% reduction. And across the whole UK population, that would equate to more than 3 million people avoiding a cold or flu each year. Sunlight on the skin is the best source of vitamin D, but the increased use of sunscreen and our weather means exposure in the UK is limited. It is possible to get vitamin D through some foods. So, for example, cereals, particularly those marketed at children, have vitamin D added as a supplement. You can also get it from oily fish or from eggs, although you'd have to eat 10 of them every day to ensure you got the right amount. Now, what researchers are arguing is that vitamin D should be added as a supplement to products like milk so that we all get our fair share. But some scientists believe that fortifying food with vitamin D won't be enough.
The recommendation is more around that we should all take a supplement in the winter months, in autumn, and that those groups that are at risk, so people with darker skin or who aren't outside as much, should take them all year round.
While the specific benefits of vitamin D are still being debated, sunshine and supplements seem to be the best sources. Dominic Hughes, BBC News.
A 15-year-old girl has pleaded not guilty to the murder of 7-year-old Katie Ruff in York. Katie Ruff was found with severe injuries in a playing field last month and died later in hospital. The teenage defendant appeared at Leeds Crown Court this morning via video link, charged with murder and possessing an offensive weapon. The Malaysian authorities have confirmed that the man who died after being poisoned at Kuala Lumpur airport is the half-brother of the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. 3 people, 2 women and a man, are now in custody in connection with his death on Monday. From Kuala Lumpur, Karishma Vaswani reports.
It's been almost a week since the mysterious death of a man at Kuala Lumpur airport on Monday, and still no answers. But Malaysia confirmed for the first time today that the dead man is North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's half-brother Kim Jong-nam, travelling on another passport.
I think he carries 2 different identities. Probably this is undercover document. This is authentic passport.
2 women, one of them shown here in police custody, have been arrested so far. Officials say one is an Indonesian, while the other was carrying a Vietnamese passport. A third suspect, a Malaysian male, has also been detained. But we don't know what they have to do with Kim Jong-nam's death. And we still don't know how he died or what he was doing in Malaysia, but we do know that he did come here fairly frequently.
We understand that this is one of the restaurants Kim Jong-nam used to frequent when he was in Malaysia. The owner of the restaurant said that he would regularly come here and that he would bring bodyguards with him as well.
I spoke to the owner of the restaurant on the phone. He was too scared to talk in person.
Did Kim Jong-nam ever tell you that he was worried for his life, that someone might kill him?
Scared, yes. He is sure scared because North Korea Kim Jong-un planning to kill him since so far 5 years.
But at the North Korean embassy in Kuala Lumpur, all was quiet. Instead, the focus in Pyongyang has been on the 75th celebrations of Kim Jong-il's birth. North Korea hasn't said anything about the death of Kim Jong-nam, and it's highly unlikely it ever will. In this secretive regime, unanswered questions are a way of life. Karishma Vaswani, BBC News, Kuala Lumpur.
The time has just turned 17 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. The new US Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, is meeting his counterparts, including Sergei Lavrov of Russia, at the G20 summit in Bonn. Still to come on the programme, all aboard for a celebration of the Wrens. We're in Portsmouth for the 100th birthday of the Women's Royal Naval Service.
Here, 20 people have been left homeless following the explosion that caused a block of flats to collapse. And survival against the odds, the rare condition affecting these twins, which required surgery while they were still in the womb.
The Prime Minister of New Zealand is in Christchurch to monitor the efforts to fight a huge wildfire, which has led to the evacuation of hundreds of homes. 2 separate fires, which began in hills to the south of the city on Monday, have combined to cover a total of nearly 5,000 acres. The city's mayor has warned that the fire could pose a threat for several weeks. Sangeeta Maiska has the latest.
These are the fatal fires that have burnt a ferocious path through the hills above Christchurch. It's taken more than 2 days to bring them under control. An aerial battle is winning the war against the flames, involving 14 helicopters and 3 planes. The cost? The life of a pilot. A highly decorated former serviceman turned firefighter who crashed while on duty. He was trying to help save the lives in these homes. A dozen were reduced to charred remains. Miraculously, residents were left unharmed. Visiting the displaced, New Zealand's Prime Minister.
There's a whole lot of people here who've been traumatised by the events, some who've lost their homes, many who've been evacuated. And this is a community that knows how to stick together when things are difficult.
A thick pall of smoke now sits over the country's second biggest city. The fire is contained but not under control. Wildfires here are rare, but that's of little comfort now.
My neighbours up the hill are absolutely terrified because, they're surrounded by forest and gorse and long dried grass, so they're very, very nervous.
We've been up pretty much all night since we got evacuated and keeping an eye on it.
The blackened hillsides are now yielding clues about the fire's origin. It's believed it started in 2 separate locations, combining to burn over 4,500 acres. Sangeeta Maiska, BBC News.
French prosecutors say they will continue their investigations into the centre-right presidential candidate François Fillon, who's been accused of cheating the parliamentary payment system. He's denied paying his wife and children inflated parliamentary salaries for minimal or even fictitious work. Let's get more from our Paris correspondent, Hugh Schofield. What is Mr. Fillon saying about this? Is he continuing with his campaign?
Absolutely. He's not got what he wanted. He wanted the prosecutor at this point to say there's not enough here to proceed. That's not what's happened. The prosecutor at this kind of interim statement has said we are going to continue with our investigations because there is enough evidence to allow us to do that. So he hasn't got what he wanted, but at the same time, it's not the worst news either. The prosecutor could have said, well, there's enough already before us to recommend that he be placed under formal investigation, at which point Mr. Fillon would have had to step down. So what we've got is more of the same. We've got more of this drip agony for François Fillon, which means that he can't properly campaign. And from the constituencies are coming reports from his agents out in the field saying it is absolutely terrible for us out here. No one wants to hear about your proposals. They just want to hear about whether you're an honest man or not. And what it means is that François Fillon, the centre-right candidate, has slumped in the polls. He's now in 3rd place in the polls, which is all significant because remember, in the French system, it's number 1 and number 2 in the first round who go through to the playoff, the second round. And right now, those 2 people are going to be Marine Le Pen for the Front National and this newcomer, the young Emmanuel Macron, the centrist, who's number 2. François Fillon needs to fight back hard if he's going to get that 2nd place.
Thank you. Hugh Schofield there in Paris. A woman and her son have been arrested by City of London police after they allegedly faked her death to try to claim life insurance. Officers say the woman's teenage son and his guardian tried to make the claim last May. Our correspondent Helena Lee has joined me. What more do we know about this, Helena?
Well, Jane, the City of London police has told us that this 18-year-old and his guardian claimed that the woman had died in a car crash in Zanzibar in East Africa last year. It's alleged they then tried to claim against a life insurance policy worth £140,000 in her name. It's also alleged that false documents, including a death certificate and also accident reports, were produced. Now, the insurance company looked into this and they couldn't verify the woman's death late last year, so they refused to pay the claim. They then passed this on to the City of London police, and what they found was that the woman was alive and living in Canada. She then returned back to the UK, was arrested and questioned by police. Her son was also arrested in December and questioned. Now, both of them have now been bailed and they are expected to return to a police station in Birmingham in April. And also the guardian, who was with the 18-year-old who was 24 years old, he was also interviewed under caution.
Helena, thank you very much, Helena Lee. Social care for elderly people is on the brink of collapse in some parts of England, according to the charity Age UK. It says more than 50,000 people are now not receiving any help, despite struggling with essential daily tasks such as washing, eating or getting out of bed. Our health correspondent Sophie Hutchinson reports.
Push, that's it.
For 10 years, Elaine Yates has cared for her husband. They managed to get some social care, but Elaine, who runs a support group for carers, says it's much harder to get now.
When Michael first came into the system, it was a lot easier then because we had our own care manager that grew to know us and could help support us in what we needed. Whereas today, people coming into the system, they don't get that type of support. They don't have their own care manager.
Today's report by Age UK says since 2010 in England there's been a rise of 50% in the number of elderly people who don't get the help they need with essential daily activities. These are getting out of bed, bathing, dressing, using the toilet, walking across a room and eating. The charity's particularly concerned about more than 50,000 people who struggle with 3 or more of these activities and receive no support at all. While social care is run in different ways across the UK, cuts cuts have meant councils in England have had to reduce the amount they spend on social care. And Age UK says emergency funding is now needed to avert a complete collapse of services in some areas.
We're seeing the beginnings of something that's going to get a lot worse. And that's because if there is going to be any extra money for social care, it's not coming yet. And that is a real concern, because every day we have an ageing population, we have more people over 85 in particular who need care.
The government says it recognises the pressures on the system and is working on a sustainable solution. There's now a growing expectation a rescue package may be included in the budget next month. Sophie Hutchinson, BBC News.
FIFA's president, Gianni Infantino, says the 2026 Football World Cup could be hosted by more than one country. He says it could involve up to 4 different nations, each using several stadia. So let's get more from our sports news correspondent, Richard Conway. So possibly as many as 4. What is he suggesting here, Richard?
Well, the reasons behind this, Jane, lie in the fact that last month FIFA agreed that the 2026 World Cup would be competed by 48 different countries, a big expansion from the current 32. So that brings with it logistical issues, it brings with it hosting issues for smaller nations. So what Gianni Infantino is saying is that he wants to expand the number or encourage co-hosting between 3 or even 4 different countries. So at the moment, the favourite for the 2026 bid, it's not even underway yet, it should be said, is America. That leaves open the possibility that a co-hosting agreement between Canada and Mexico, despite the difficulties with the Trump administration between those two countries, becomes a real possibility. In the wider context, it's very politically astute for Gianni Infantino. Lots of smaller nations will welcome this move, the chance to play a part in the World Cup, the premier competition. He has a re-election in 2019. He will be hoping that they remember this come polling day.
All right, Richard, thank you, Richard Conway. 100 years ago, the Women's Royal Naval Service was founded to free up more men for active service at sea during the First World War. It was the start of a hugely significant change in the role of women in the armed forces. Wrens, as they became known, served as cooks, stewards, dispatch riders and telegraphists, and went on to play key roles in the Navy in the Second World War and beyond. Our correspondent Duncan Kennedy is in Portsmouth, where events are being held throughout the year. Duncan, hello.
Hello there, Jane. Welcome to the heart of this exhibition in the Naval Dockyard here, charting, as you said, the start of this Royal Naval Service for women back in 1917. But don't be fooled into thinking this is some old dry exhibition. This is all about the people, the women that made up the service. Take a look at this photo from 1919, the first ever parade of Wrens. And alongside this permit to go home for an A. Rossiter dating December 1918. That was her Christmas leave to go and see her family. All part of this remarkable exhibition.
At 90 years old, Wynne Price still has an affection for the sea. Whether it's her admiration for these World War II motorboats, or the time she joined as a 17-year-old in 1944, the Wrens have always held a strong bond over her maritime memories.
You had to go in what they were short of, and they had cooks and stewards they wanted. Well, I couldn't cook, so I opted for a steward.
Proud then and honoured now to be celebrating 100 years of the Wrens.
In a way, they started equality. That was the beginning of it, you know.
You were the pioneers.
I guess, no, the ones before me were pioneers.
The new Wren is welcomed by a petty officer and ushered into the presence of the chief officer.
The Women's Royal Naval Service was formed in 1917, but it was in the Second World War they came of age.
She's the skipper, and it's by her orders that the mailboat stops at the ships named on that precious letter.
This may have been the extent of their seaborne presence, but the Wren's 74,000 volunteers were vital to take the strain off men in the Navy's non-fighting roles.
Without the Wrens, we wouldn't have the service that we've got today. So they very much did lay the foundations for the women who are serving today. So it's a really nice opportunity to look back and celebrate the achievements of the past 100 years and even the pioneers before them.
The new exhibition charts this vital service across the last century. When the women integrated with the men in 1993, out went the title Wrens, but they've continued to embody the standards and professionalism of the Royal Navy.
The pioneers really set the bar high, I think, and they had to prove themselves, which they did really well. After that, it was for the other women to embrace that change, and they took it forward, and it's continued to go forward.
Women now make up 10% of the Royal Navy. 100 years after they became the first of the three services to officially recruit women, the new exhibition is a moment for early wrens like Wynne to reflect, commemorate and cherish their connections with Britain's maritime heritage.
Well, this is all about the personal detail, the letters, the photographs and the uniforms. It all opens to the public on Saturday, and this exhibition lasts for the rest of the year. Jane.
Oh, Duncan, fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. It is weather time right now, of course, and Stav Daneos has joined me. Hello.
Hello there, Jane. Thank you very much. Well, with the milder air now across the UK and scenes like this one in Norfolk, some good spells of sunshine is going to feel positively spring-like. This was the picture earlier on in Norfolk. Clouds have built a little bit, and big contrast to the north of the UK, where across Scotland we've still got fairly strong winds and plenty of cloud and showers because it's an area closer to the low pressure just to the north of Scotland. So you can see where the sunshine is across the south and the east, although, like I mentioned, clouds tending to fill in a little bit, although the southern counties of England should hold on to that sunshine all day. That area of low pressure across Scotland is moving off in towards the North Sea. The winds will be gradually getting lighter. We've got another weather feature pushing in towards Northern Ireland, bringing some rain here. But like I mentioned, lots of sunshine across southern counties of England, some pretty decent temperatures, probably South Devon being the warm spot, potentially seeing 13, maybe 14 Celsius. But look, double-figure values in the sunshine across the south. More cloud developing in the Midlands, a few showers developing here, and rains pushing in towards Wales, northwest England. This rain stretching in from Northern Ireland across the Irish Sea. Sunshine and blustery showers across Scotland. These will gradually ease, though, through the day, along with the wind, too, as that area of low pressure moves off in towards Scandinavia. So it turns dry with some clear spells for Scotland, some clear spells as well across the southwest. This means it'll be quite chilly here, with maybe a touch of frost and also a bit of mist and fog developing. With central slides to the UK from Northern Ireland through the Midlands into the southeast, holding on to the cloud. Some outbreaks of rain, so here it'll be pretty mild. We start Friday off then on generally dry note, bit of rain across the northwest, some mist and fog around. Could be quite dense, but it should lift and allow some sunshine to develop, certainly across Scotland, the northeast of England, maybe a little bit in the southwest, but I think a cloudier day generally for Friday. But it will still be mild with the air coming in from the south-southwest. We're looking at double figures for most. I'm feeling quite pleasant in the sunshine across the northeast. The mild air still with us this weekend as well. There'll be areas of sunshine, central, southern and eastern parts of the UK, with the northwest seeing the thickest of the cloud and outbreaks of rain. And actually be quite wet and windy, I think, for Northern Ireland and Scotland on Saturday. The majority of England and Wales, though, should stay dry with some good sunny spells. And notice those temperatures, double-figure values for most. Again on Sunday, I think it's the northwest corner seeing the strongest of the winds, the thickest of the cloud outbreaks of rain, with the driest of the weather, southern and eastern areas. Again, double-figure values, and those mild, that mild air and those high temperatures last into the start of next week as well. Jane?
Some good news. Thank you very much, Stav. Thank you. And just a reminder of our main story here this lunchtime. The new US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is meeting counterparts, including Russia's Sergei Lavrov, at the G20 summit in Bonn. That is all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we join the BBC's news teams wherever you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.